Welcome everyone to another episode of the Shaman's Way podcast. As always, this episode comes from the teachings of our amazing friend and shaman in residence, Kriket. We hope you're enjoying these podcasts as much as we enjoy making them, and I'd like to take just a moment to ask you if you would please leave us a rating and a comment in iTunes or whichever podcast player you're listening to us from. Giving us a rating and sharing this podcast with others is the biggest way you can tell us that you like our show. Now, without further ado, on with the episode.
Hello, and thank you for coming back to Shaman's Way to chat with me about whatever it is that I happen to have on my mind. And you, my constant listener, we are going to talk today about power animals and spirit guides. The first time I heard the word power animal, obviously it was a long time ago, but it was from my teacher at the time who had the drumming circle, and it was my very first introduction into shamanism, and I was given the 5, maybe 7-minute spiel on lower world, middle world, upper world, how to get there, what you're going to do, what you're going to meet, and how you're going to do it. So I know I told this story before in other podcasts, so I won't tell it again. The term power animal comes from Michael Harner, who I found out on Saturday or Sunday that Michael Harner had passed away, and so I'm going to talk about him in a later podcast, but we can credit North American shamanism in its modern version. All of us can trace our lineage in one way or another back to Michael Harner. So Michael Harner explained that a power animal is an animal that everybody has. And if you don't have one, you're either sick or you're unwell. And so the very first thing that you do in a basic workshop, if you're taking one from the Foundation for Shamanic Studies, or if you've worked together in drumming circles and you found your power animal, the first thing you do is retrieve your power animal. And in the basic workshops, the next thing you do is gather some courage in your journey work and retrieve a power animal for someone else in the workshop. I know that I've talked about power animals before, and I know I've talked about my first power animal, but I want to talk about the general relationship of power animals and the relationship of spirit guides. And I think two of the differences or aspects that I see between not only traditional shamanism and the modern shamanism or neo-shamanism, and then there are other traditions, the orishas, the hoodoo, the voodoo, the different traditions, the Inuit peoples, many of them have their spirits and their gods and their goddesses that they work with in relation to their work. Power animals have been incredibly important members of my spirit world. However, when I reflect upon it, I do have to wonder if power animals are what I really focus on, because that is the very beginning of my teachings, was power animals. Although you do journey into the upper world and you do meet your spirit guide in the upper world, and that can be absolutely anything. Or it could be that I wanted to have a relationship with animals more than I wanted to have a relationship with spirits. And spirits wanted to have a relationship with me more in the form of animals than in particular spirits. I don't have particular gods or goddesses that I work with or a specific cosmology. I like to refer to the Finnish myths, but I like to refer to many myths. I have often reflected that the reason I don't work with gods or goddesses is because I'm a very simple woman. And now I know many people, especially my friends, would laugh about that. And they always chastise me, you are far from simple. But I think I'm simple. Anyway, that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that I think that my relationship with the gods and the goddesses or spirit guides is not so important to me because I'm not a very complicated person. I know that there are many spirits in and about and around, and I know that there are many names to the many spirits. And I know that there are traditions which have very ingrained relationships to their gods and their spirit guides. I have a very deep and ingrained relationship to my power animals when I journey, but I do have in this world, in ordinary reality, in the mundane world, I do have spirit guides that do talk to me, and I hear, I often get advice, and I know that it is from them. My power animals, the tattoos that I have across my back, there is one that is facing outward, watching my back, and that tattoo will burn or become quite a bit warmer than other parts of my skin if I'm in ordinary reality and should watch my back or something is coming to my back. So I rely on the relationship between the spirits that I work with in the spirit world and the spirits that I work with here in the ordinary reality. Power animals have many shapes and forms for me. I work with some very rarely. I work with skunk every now and then, and skunk came into one of my journeys again just last week. And skunk is an animal that, believe it or not, helps me with the land of the dead and helps me to do very intense soul retrievals. And I am always surprised to see skunk. Now, I may have seen skunk all these years, maybe a handful of times. So I don't have a very deep relationship, but it always is a comfort when skunk shows up and is willing to come with me into some of the darkest places. I have a very great relationship with snakes, and I worked for many years with the Egyptian snake Udajet or Wajet, depending on how you would like to pronounce it. She called herself Udajet to me, and I had never heard of her before. So when I came out of the spirit world, I looked up the spirit or the goddess and found out that she was a cobra goddess. And so for many years, that particular goddess that snake, Udajet, has been a guardian for my physical self. So if I am using my rattle, and when I use my rattle, I call in my authentic self. And then I call in my spirits that watch the right side of my body, and I call in the spirits that watch the left side of my body. And depending on how I feel that day, Udajet wraps her coils or wraps herself around me and up over top of my head. And then her hooded head or unhooded head, depending on her mood, rests. So it's a perfect spiral up, and she is the pinnacle of what rises above me. If I am having a day where I'm feeling very expansive, then where my physical body is and where Udajet is quite a distance. If I am working in a spirit room and I need spirits to trust me, if I'm doing compassion, depossession work, or work that requires me to have more of a presence, then Udajet will come very, very close to my body and create, a tighter aura. And that is one of the ways that I work with my power animals in this world. Spirit guides for me are usually related if I am trying to access a way of teaching or explaining an aspect of the mind or the consciousness or the compartmentalization of the consciousness of humankind. Each god or goddess has a particular personality, a particular set of responsibilities. Many have weapons or magic or even emotions at their beck and call to give to those who behest of it or give to even themselves in that regard. So it is only when I am attempting to bring the spirit of cold into a story or into a ritual, then I would bring Skadi in. And Skadi is the ice giant, and she also became the ice goddess. And she comes from Northern Europe and rides on skis and has oftentimes wolves. She is proficient as proficient can be with a spear and with a bow and arrow. She is a great huntress. She is also one of the very few Norse or Northern tradition giantesses who became a goddess, who fought for her rights or fought for her own home, her own self. Her father had been murdered, and she went to avenge her father's murder. It is very challenging to find a relationship to any one particular, how can I put it, any one particular tradition. And I think that part of that is because I don't come from a tribe, but part of it is that it hasn't really been an important part of my spiritual path, because I've always just relied on whichever spirits come to me to be the ones that I need to look at and the ones that I need to address. One of the aspects of spirit guides that I really like, and the personifications in the form of gods and goddesses, is the ability to manifest or bring forward a particular trick, a particular lesson, a particular aspect. So if that god or goddess or being really has a message to share, when I'm journeying regarding the lessons I'm going to teach, then that god or goddess will come to me. In my later years now, after I've been practicing for a number of years, I have been able to become comfortable with my knowledge of some of the more gross, meaning more tangible aspects of spirit. And what I find is that by reading about the pantheons, the gods, the goddess, the spirit guides, what I find is that there is at times very detailed information, and depending on the authors that I have read, bring some very good insight into the functioning of the human aspect as personified in that spirit guide, god or goddess. Now, a spirit guide and a god and goddess, I'm using them interchangeably, but I don't believe there are interchangeable words. I know that gods and goddesses can be guides, and I know that they're spirits. So, let's just cut the chase of the brass tacks of it, and let's just get to those unpack those words. Spirit guides, in my training over my years and what I've studied independently, so I've studied different channeled beings, I've studied and read different works from people who have had relationships with spirits. So mediumship is one, channeling is one, and I have my own abilities in both of those. I mean, there's far more talented people than I do, but I certainly can hold my own for my own purposes in those regards. Spirit guides are what I believe are beings that come to us that are not necessarily associated with a cosmogony or cosmology or a mythology of a particular place and or people, or both. I don't think spirit guides are attached to any one particular place or any one particular thing. They may be attached to something physical. So there may be a spirit guide that shows up in some of the sacred places in the earth as opposed to gods or goddesses. So there may be that. But then that brings into a whole other question. Are you working with devas then? Are you working with the spirit of the land? And so on and so forth. The distinction, therefore, I want to make is that the gods and the goddesses that come from cultures often have a a context within our own mythology, where spirit guides don't necessarily have a context within our own mythology. Power animals, the concept of the power animal may be outside of our concepts, outside of our teachings. However, the animal is a relatable subject to the conscious mind because it's relatable to the tangible world in which we live in. So therefore, we have a ability to interact with many different aspects, but I'm just taking these categories as very specific ways to communicate or to move in spirituality or in spirit. If I want to work with a particular spirit guide in the spirit world when I'm doing my journey work, they generally come to me, but I do have spirits that work with me in very specific ways, such as I have a group or a number of spirits who help me in my healing cave, where I often will bring my patients into that place, and these spirits will work on them and will do surgery and ensure that they're well taken care of. I also have spirit guides in the form of a being that has been with me in the tangible world my whole life. I don't remember never having this being with me. And what is very fascinating is that this being has also been seen by other people. And I don't know life without this being talking in my left ear. I don't know life without, if I think about it, feeling the relationship between my physical body and the spiritual body of my spirit guide. So that is how I choose the word spirit guide. The being that is with me my whole life is not from any particular pantheon associated with any particular land or peoples that has been, created from one God, blah, 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 until we get to a myriad of emotions and so on and so forth. So my spirit guide is not associated with the earthly realm or the earthly stories. My spirit guide stories, the ones that have been shared with me, are nothing like the stories that we have on earth. When I really delve into some of the different goddesses and gods in the work of yoga and in the work of the Indian gods and goddesses, their eddas, their stories, they are very intuitive to the human mind, to human desires, to human relationships, and it is a people who have written their stories for some time. Because I don't speak other languages, so I don't always have the opportunity I would really love to learn more Spanish myths. I really would, but I don't speak Spanish, and I haven't been able to find a solid or relatable author to tell me some of the in-depth myths, such as what I would be able to find with Shiva, with that particular pantheon of beings. When I come to the Asian, and Asia meaning all of Asia, not just China or Japan, I'm going to make you aware that my consciousness is just as big as yours, and Asia covers a huge portion of the globe. So if I'm going to specifically come to the gods and the goddesses that I was introduced to when I went to Cambodia, and what I learned was how the temples were changed depending on which particular religion was in power during that particular occupation of Cambodia, and also in Vietnam. That happened in Vietnam too, and the Vietnamese would often raid Cambodia. And so a lot of their myths and their stories, even though they're different, they're very similar. And they also had an incredibly rich story and an incredibly rich mythology. And there are mythologies that are not written down. I can think of the Australian Aborigine, the oldest people, the oldest stories in the world, the oldest oral traditions. Wouldn't it be a treat to sit down and to listen to the elders of the Australian Aborigines or the New Zealand, the Maori peoples, and share in their stories? I would love to hear some of the stories. And what are some of the differences in what the gods and the goddesses in Australia? What are some of the differences from a psychological perspective, from a heart perspective, from a learning perspective? Would be different from the Indian perspective of Parvati and Ganesh and Shiva. Like, what would be the differences in there? And would there be any? I don't know. So spirit guides, gods and goddesses, and power animals never cease to amaze me. They never cease to show me their intricacies as well as their gross realities. And there are, as we've talked about, I've done a number of podcasts regarding specific power animals, and we've talked about power animals and other ones. And there are, in my world, there are very specific power animals for very specific tasks. And then there are power animals that are just always with me because they're my primary. And then, as I've said before, there are animals that are in the spirit world that help me that are not power animals at all. I had a teacher in the spirit world, a grandmother, and she was a very integral part of my learning, healing work, tracking work, many different aspects of the fundamentals of my lower world capabilities or my lower world skills. Eventually, my grandmother left, and I was left without a human-esque guide in the lower world. However, when I go to the upper world, I generally do see more human-esque or human verbiage beings than I do in the lower world. In the lower world, my power animals never have a conversation with me in a physical form. So if you and I are sitting across the table and we're sharing tea, coffee, drink, whatever we're sharing, and you and I are talking to each other, I can see your lips move. Unless you're a really freaking good ventriloquist, then you better teach me. But, so in that relationship, but with my power animals, it is more the telepathic communication or the knowledge. And when I'm in the upper world, there are full-on conversations, and I really enjoy and appreciate those conversations. Sometimes I like to journey outside of Earth's orbit and atmosphere and into the other planets to discuss some of the Earth feelings or Earth relationships that I have, to truly get an otherworldly perspective on human emotions, human interactions, my emotions, my interactions. Another tool to improve my relationship with my power animals is to study it in the physical world. Now, I know that I said earlier that my power animals, the relationship I have with them, it usually stays in the spirit world when I'm doing journey work, and the spirit guides help me affect in the mundane world. What I like to do, and I think is very important, is to learn about the habitat and the behaviors of the animals that I work with. I work with lions, so I've spent quite a bit of time studying, researching, and watching documentaries on lions. I've never gone to Africa to see them. And that really isn't on my bucket list at this moment in time, but that could change. I mean, sometimes we are fickle in our humanness. And as a young girl growing up in rural Alberta, it was also provided me with an opportunity to observe and to watch animals and to be able to read tracks and follow tracks. And nobody taught me any of that. It was just something that I had done and I had a basic interest in. And from reading different books, I was able to pick up a tip here or two in regards to how to live in the wild. or how to at least read the wild. I'm still really horrible with directions, just so you know. I can get lost in a heartbeat, but heck, I always find my way back. So I think it's a win-win situation. And then, so that's an important aspect of power animals. It's the same as working with gods or goddesses. I don't want to always mix different gods and goddesses from different things. So if I'm doing a ceremony, I don't feel comfortable calling in a goddess from Egypt and a goddess from Japan and then a goddess from, say, Argentina. I'm not comfortable doing that. Not because I don't believe that everything is interconnected, but because I believe that if you are asking somebody to join you for supper or to join you in sacredness, I think it is incumbent upon you to give preference to the person, to the spirit that you've invited. And I don't always see how the mixing of spirits from different traditions or different myths work, because sometimes they have, how they would say in the pharmaceuticals, contraindicated relationships. But that's just my preference. And if that is not your preference, that is not your preference. We have the opportunity in this time, in this space, to work our own individual ways and to have our own individual beliefs. I don't like to bring in different things. I like to work with one spirit at a time if I'm doing ceremony or if I'm teaching circle. The reason I like to do that is because I think humans have a really short attention span. I know that I do. I also know that if someone is coming in cold to a ceremony, it would really benefit me to explain one well as opposed to a few a little bit. And in order to move deeply into ceremony, I like to understand the relationship between the energy, or how that energy is perceived from where it's come from, and how that energy is going to affect me. So if I'm working with Skadi, the ice giantess, the ice goddess, then that's going to activate my northern Alberta woman aspect, because the cold is really not an issue. The riding on skis, it's not really an issue. So there are aspects of her fighting is not really an issue. There are aspects of Skadi that I personally can relate to. I think that there are benefits, and I realize that there are many people who work with primarily spirits and spirit guides and don't do a lot of work with animals. And I know that some of us work a lot with animals and not a lot of us work with the gods and the goddesses. But that's just, that's just me. That's just my opinion. I think that it is invaluable to wonder how you're going to relate to anything. And what I mean by that is explore how you feel with respect to a being or an animal that is asking to be called in. So if there is a god or a goddess that you are feeling called to work with on one particular circle night or one particular full moon, find out a little bit more about the history, find out and do some digging into some of the comparative myths perhaps. Do your homework. It doesn't hurt you to learn more. The more you learn, the deeper you can go. The deeper that I go, the deeper my relationship is to the world around me, to my own self, and to the spirits who are with me here and with me in other places. I like to have aspects of comparing different myths and comparing different ideologies for the very simple reason that it gives me a greater insight. If I am working with tiger, there are various types of tigers, and I like to find out about the environment, each of the different environments that each of the different tigers live in, and how they're perceived within the community, and whether or not those communities have any myths with respect to that. Fox is everywhere, all over the world, and there are many different types of fox, from the little fennec foxes in the Sahara to the large maned foxes in northern Ethiopia. And I'm not talking about the gray wolves or the red maned wolves. There are also large foxes. The understanding where the different animals and some of the different stories that come with them also give me different insights into that particular animal. So if, say for instance, the frog and the toad, different cultures have different stories for the frog and the toad. And I like to explore those. I like to compare those. The Eastern version of the dragon and the Western version of the dragon are two entirely different relationships to the dragon. So one as a warring being and one as a malevolent, benevolent being that created the entire world and still holds pearls. It is only richer if I can understand some of the different parts or some of the different aspects of the world around me. I like to compare different goddesses of war. I like to compare some of the different women of war. Boadicea comes to mind as one warrior that was a living woman and was a very fierce woman, to the Athena, who is the goddess of war and who has much strength, to Artemis, who is a huntress as well. So there are different beings that have similar functions within a culture's psyche, within a culture's ideas, ideologies that may be similar, but there may be subtle differences. So one of the benefits of working outside of a particular tradition is that I get to understand and I get to pull down the subtler meanings of a particular spirit. I do very much respect my elders who are of the belief that shamanism is only effective within a community, within a tradition, whether it's Mongolian, whether it's Tibet, whatever the shamanic tradition is, and that true shamanism and true ritual can only be found in that fashion. And I respect my elders, and an aspect of me truly believes you and truly believes that. The other aspect of me that has worked this long and this far with having guidance primarily just from the spirits and very rarely from human teachers, I have a very rich understanding of the spirit world, and I haven't had to work or understand some of the laws, the bylaws, the taboos, the rites, the rituals. There's a lot to understand within that, and I don't have a teacher in that regard. However, my spirits have been some kick-ass teachers over the years and have never failed me and have taught me more than I can forget. Or I've forgotten, you know what I'm trying to say. However, they are such amazing beings, and if I truly want to learn, there is nothing my spirits wouldn't provide for me. And if I wanted to try something, I just wait. And eventually my spirits bring me everything that I want to try, whether it's from a Marcino or whether it is a discussion on the finer points of PTSD and the brainstem functions that it affects. So there are many different aspects to this life and to this world, and I find it all just quite delicious, and I find it all just overwhelmingly awesome, and also sometimes a little bit frustrating, because sometimes I want to know more than what I have, and I have overcome much of my impatience over the years, but by golly, I was an impatient person when I first began shamanism. However, that is my short version of power animals, spirit guides, and gods and goddesses. If you are inspired to learn more about your own practice or your own beliefs, yay! And if you are content where you are, yay! Enjoy where you are, enjoy where you're going, because it isn't always fun. It isn't always sunshine, wishes, and candy cane kisses, but there are always moments of depth, understanding, and clarity that come, which make the ride well worth the ticket price. Until next time, farewell.
Thank you again for joining us here on the Shaman's Way podcast. If you have any questions, would like to make a request for a future episode, or if you're looking for other shamanic resources, including free drumming tracks, please visit us at shamansway.net. Until the next episode, be well, everyone.